In this presentation, I'll be talking about the Horizon Report 2015 K-12 edition. I'll be talking specifically about a couple of wicked challenges, as well as BYOD, bring your own device, and makerspaces in the classroom. So let's start with the first of the two wicked challenges, which is scaling up innovations. So this means increasing the scale or the scope in which innovations and technology are implemented in the classroom. So what are the barriers? It's clear that there's no absence of innovation. Technology is evolving at a faster pace than it ever has before. And indeed, best practices and educational ideas are evolving at a very fast pace. What there is an absence of, though, is infrastructure to identify these best practices and systems. So what are the solutions? First, there obviously needs to be proper funding and adequate training for teachers to use these innovations, use these new best practices. To this end, there should be funding around existing models instead of only new innovations. So in other words, if there are good existing models in place, we need to put funding and support towards scaling up these models, scaling up the use of these models, instead of only putting funding towards developing new innovations and new best practices. To that end, we also need to recognize and support schools that are scaling up innovations. And finally, we need to establish networks of practice that help to facilitate peer exchange. So the next wicked challenge is teaching complex thinking. So complex thinking partnered with communication are key skills for the next generation. And modern computer science is one way in which schools can teach these skills. For example, many schools now have coding classes where students develop apps, websites, and design solutions for real-world problems in a collaborative environment. And on top of this, in these classes, students need to make these complex ideas understandable. These are clearly key skills for our 21st century workforce. So to this end, just as mathematics is a foundational discipline, language is a foundational discipline, maybe computer science should be a discipline as well. This is what the Horizon Report puts forth. Standards also need to be set for teaching critical and complex thinking so that there is a framework for people designing curriculum and designing programs to base their programs off of. There also need to be resources created by leaders in the field. So for example, Area 267 provides educators and families with definitions and frameworks for teaching complex thinking. All right, let's move on to technology innovations in the classroom and innovative technology developments. So according to the Horizon Report, there are now 7 categories that technologies and digital strategies can be put into. So the first is consumer technologies. So these are technologies that are created for recreational purposes, but they could be adopted for educational use. There are digital strategies, which are not so much technologies as they are ways of using devices and software for educational purposes. There are enabling technologies which expand the reach of our devices. So, for example, I just downloaded a scanner app on my smartphone today, which allowed me to scan a receipt to submit an insurance claim, which all of a sudden made my smartphone much more useful than it was already for me. There are internet technologies, which are techniques and infrastructure that make networks more transparent. There is learning technology, which is educational software that's explicitly designed for learning or online learning environments. So, for example, Schoology would be an example of a learning technology. There is social media, which is another category. And this would fall under the category of consumer technology, but according to the Horizon Report, it's become so pervasive that it's been elevated to its own category. And the final category is visualization. So these are technologies that range from simple infographics to complex data analysis tools, basically that help us mine large data sets and take advantage of the brain's ability to process visual information. Okay, and we're going to move on now to BYOD technology, or BYOD, bring your own device in the classroom. This is actually an increasing trend in schools, and it reflects basically modern lifestyles. People are increasingly connected and increasingly access information on their phones, on their personal laptops, on tablets like iPads and Android. Another reason that this trend is spreading is that BYOD cuts down on tech spending. If students are bringing in their own technology, then schools don't have to purchase as much, especially if they want to have a one-to-one program. Another advantage of bringing your own device is that people can be more productive right off the bat because they are familiar with their device. So I don't have to, if I'm a student in school, I don't have to learn to use a new operating system, learn to use a new device, navigate it, figure out how everything is organized, the file systems. I can just integrate my use of, I can just integrate the program and integrate my use of my device into the program. So bring your own device is, as I mentioned before, is starting to gain widespread acceptance in many schools. They're starting to use it as a supplement for one-to-one technology programs where there are limited resources, which is obviously in a lot of places. And they also have a lot of, BYOD also allows for a lot of personalized content. It allows users to incorporate their interests. So for example, I can use a music app that's on my phone, but maybe not on someone else's, to find music for part of a presentation. Okay, and finally, we're going to move on to makerspaces. So, makerspaces, basically the makerspace movement is driven by artists, technology enthusiasts, engineers, builders, tinkerers, or anyone really with a passion for making. It's also now being looked upon as a method for engaging learners in higher order problem solving. Makerspaces, you'll find a variety of technology and tools. You'll find things such as laser cutters, soldering irons, different kinds of computers, saws, drills, circuitry materials, Lego, sewing devices, and well, really more things than you can name. The point of having this wide variety of materials is that these makerspaces are supposed to be a place where anyone can use their ingenuity to become a producer. In the classroom, makerspaces can help students be entrepreneurs. For example, at one school, students set up shop and sold items that they made in their makerspace, and they donated some of the profits to charity. Makerspaces can also help students become agents of change. At a high school in Sierra Leone, makerspaces are being used for young women, to help young women make shoes to protect them from fleas. So these are just a couple of examples of how makerspaces can be really useful and provide authentic learning experiences for students in schools. Well, that's all for this presentation. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching.